from the CyberHub bunker and studio. You're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast, Tech Corner. And now, join me in welcoming your host and CISO, James Azar.
All right, folks, it's RSA day 3, I believe. I forget the days. RSA just seems like one large bloob of events and days and nights, and you can't tell the difference, especially when you're in person. But even worse when you're virtual. I feel like this year's been busier than an actual in-person event. We've got an awesome episode coming up. Mike, how's it going? Mike Fraser is the co-founder, CEO, and chief architect over at Refactr. Mike, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, James.
Love it. So, folks, before I get started with Mike, though, please make sure to subscribe right now. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. You can get all the awesome RSA content and well beyond RSA. We put out a lot of content year-round, so you can check that out as well. If you're listening on your favorite podcast listening platform, please make sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. Mike, before we kind of get started, would you mind just giving our audience a brief intro into yourself as a person, like a little bit about your background and how you kind of got started in this whole DevSecOps, DevOps process?
Yeah, absolutely, James. So I started out my career in the Air Force. I was a cybersecurity practitioner and have been in cloud and cybersecurity and now DevSecOps for almost 20 years now. It was kind of an evolution over my career, just seeing how the industry was changing, how everything was becoming software, and really focused a few years back on trying to solve this problem, being that resource that was working with a lot of different Fortune 100 companies around being able to build more modern solutions, trying to go through digital transformation. A lot of it was geared towards DevOps type processes and tools. Now there's this, obviously this term DevSecOps, adding security into DevOps workflows, and it's really was something that I saw as a modernization approach. And also, I got received my bachelor's and master's in computer science because I was really looking at coming over to the developer world so that I could be that person that was bridging the gap, but also understanding the problem firsthand and how to try to solve it.
Brilliant. So let's talk about the problem, the elephant in the room. What's I think a lot of people around RSA are talking about this year, which is the software supply chain challenges that have existed right from SolarWinds in December to Proxy Logon and Microsoft Exchange in March of this year, really January, but publicly known in March. And now CodeCov. And, every day it seems like we see another victim of the CodeCov incident. Why are we seeing so many challenges around the software supply chain? What are some of the things, you attribute this to?
So there are a lot of legacy-based products and systems out there, and then there's the more modern where people are trying to automate as much as possible, focusing on a lot more cloud-native stuff. And so when it comes to a lot of these supply chain issues, there's not a lot of emphasis on what the legacy plus the more modern approach and how do I bridge that gap. And then the other piece of it is collaboration between cybersecurity and DevOps and development. And those two teams traditionally have been siloed in most enterprises and in the government as well, with customers I work with there. And it's really one of those things where the supply chain management not just has to have more visibility on what you're building as software, but also software is eating everything. So everything is becoming software. And the question there is, how do I solve the ability to have not just visibility, but be able to react to what I find when it comes to the tools, the automation content, the software itself, as everything's becoming software defined, and even the pipelining systems that you're creating these more modern solutions and thinking about them as they apply to both your still on-premise, because a lot of customers still have presence in data centers and on-premise, and then also in the cloud, and taking a more hybrid approach on how am I going to solve this and how am I going to have the visibility that I need to have to be able to not just see what I have from all these different pieces of the solutions that I'm building, but also be able to build a reactive process to what I find so that I can have a more agile approach to it, because the agility is the key. How fast can I react to the problems that I find? But I first need to know what the actual problems are, right? And maybe some library and some language that I'm using. It may be the tools themselves. And so again, as everything becomes software, we really have to think about this in more of a holistic approach, as opposed to it just being like, oh, I have a bunch of open source libraries I'm using. That's great, but that's just one piece of the overall solution that people need or organizations need visibility on in order to be able to solve this supply chain issue.
Yeah, the supply chain issue to me is probably the most critical issue we face as practitioners because of the third, fourth, and fifth level vendors, right? That we don't know about. You know your third level vendor, you know your third party because that's who you're interacting with, but you don't know who your third party is interacting with to get you the services that you rely on. And that creates a whole new set of challenges for organizations. You know, as a CISO, I hear DevSecOps, and I'm a big proponent of DevSecOps, right? But there's inherent challenges of turning DevOps people to DevSecOps people. You've been doing this now for nearly 20 years. You've sat on, you're a cybersecurity practitioner, but you've also sat on the DevOps side. Why is it so hard to turn DevOps to DevSecOps?
Because it's a complete paradigm shift. So the challenge is developers and DevOps engineers expect to be able to go at a certain velocity. And cybersecurity traditionally impedes the speed at which they can deliver at. And so you really want to be cognizant about how and where you're adding cybersecurity in. So we constantly hear, every year now at RSA, it keeps coming up, shift left, right? But conceptually, if you're just asking DevOps folks to shift left to be able to add cybersecurity into their current processes, that's only one piece of the overall issue. The other issue is cybersecurity still has to maintain responsibility over what the DevOps and developers are doing. And also everything is becoming software defined. So it's no longer just about releasing software you create in your organization to production. It's everything else that encompasses that, and even other use cases that now around network automation and infrastructure and so on, where you have to apply the same type of principles to that. And so you have to look at both the brownfield, the existing, where I want to augment my existing DevOps processes, but also the greenfield, where I want to take a lot of the products and services that are out there on the cybersecurity side and be able to put them into the same type of pipeline process, so that DevSecOps is just a natural evolution of DevOps, where cybersecurity is built right in. I don't even have to think about it. It's just there, as opposed to it being an afterthought and something I'm going to add into my existing DevOps workflows. So over time, I look at it as a complete culture or paradigm shift, where we're not building DevSecOps teams, we're having multiple teams working together and being able to collaborate. And that really requires capabilities that can cater to a full spectrum of technical talent, from the tools to the platform that you're building automation, to all of the products and services that you have to support, from cloud providers to cybersecurity vendors to other vendors that you're tying into from a SaaS and other type of products as well.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up a great point here, which is what we saw over the last year, with the onslaught of the C word and a lot of people starting to work remotely. The ability to work across multiple teams has become an increasingly, I think I want to say, a greater challenge for a lot of folks. When you look at a multi-cloud environment, which, building on Azure is not the same as AWS, it's not the same as, Google Cloud, and then you're trying to convert your on-prem stuff to a multi-cloud environment, that creates a lot of setbacks within DevOps, because you end up having specific teams working on specific products. Talk a little bit about how your platform specifically, because that was one of the things I noticed, is you're really able to simplify security in a multi-cloud environment, correct?
Correct. And it goes back to the tools that you want to support in order to do this. So as we're moving towards software-defined everything, or as I call it, IT as code, every piece of the solution that you're building, you have to be able to build the agile automation around it. And from a multi-cloud perspective, you have to support the different tools that each team is going to use. So the tool chain is very important for this to be something that both DevOps and developers can use, as well as cybersecurity practitioners. And from an automation standpoint, when SOAR came out for cybersecurity, it was really about making the experience easier to build playbooks around integrating into different cybersecurity products so that you could actually have actions and be triggered on events. Now, some of the key features there, like the visual playbook builder and the ability to tie that into your SIM were great, but what had happened is there's a much more modern need because the DevOps folks don't care about SOAR. They want to build in the tools that they're using, right? So it could be cloud native templates, Terraform, Ansible, just pick the tools. But then there's also cybersecurity products that are becoming more pipeline friendly or were built with that in mind from day one. And a good example is like HashiCorp Vault versus say an IAM products like CyberHub, right? Where there's the more legacy and then trying to come over to the modern and then building it modern from the very beginning. So from that standpoint, we really have to look at how can we provide functionality that cybersecurity practitioners can use. And that's where we come at it from a low code perspective, but having the ability to leverage existing automation content. So if I add in a Terraform configuration, or to your point on multi-cloud, any of the cloud native templates, we can support them in their native format and have them available packaged up as low code pipelines so that truly the full spectrum of technical talent, including cybersecurity practitioners that both know how to code or write scripts and those that don't, can have not just a seat at the table, but actually be collaborating with their DevOps and cloud architect counterparts.
Brilliant. So, as a CISO, I get a lot of pushback for DevSecOps, right? There's just a ton of pushback from, not only the DevOps people, they're not bad people, right? Like you said, they work in a very high-paced environment. They have to deliver. I don't want to say they don't have time. And I know people say, James, security is everyone's responsibility, but that's like saying, is finance everyone's responsibility? If the CFO goes over budget, is that everyone's responsibility or just the CFO's?
Yeah, that's a great point.
DevOps people have to do DevOps, and we as security practitioners have to look at what they do and try to integrate it and make it so that it's almost seamless to them. Talk a little bit about how you guys solve that problem, because I watched a video on your website at refactr.it, and I was just like, okay, this is really interesting. So talk a little bit about how you guys really make it easy to win DevOps people in.
So there's a couple of pieces to it. The first piece is we have to support the tools that the DevOps folks expect and we architected in a way that was closely aligned to CI/CD. So a lot of the same principles that they expect coming from what they already know are applicable in our platform. The other piece of it is the interoperability where we can be tied into other platforms. So we work with various CI/CD platforms out there like GitHub, GitLab, and so on, to be able to tie into those. But we also work with customers that want to tie us in to their existing platforms they've created themselves, their cloud management platforms. And so that interoperability was critical for us to make sure that we had that in from the very beginning. And we've added additional functionality through our SDK, again, because we want to make sure that from a low code perspective, that is really good to get started. But at scale, you have to have the ability to be able to support everything that the DevOps teams want to use. And that's why they like our platform, because of the tools we support, the ability to get in as low level code wise as they want, the interoperability between other systems. And in our SDK, we have incoming webhooks, we have a CLI, we have a full API. So we were API first out of the gate. And that was super critical to ensure that we could tie into anything that they wanted to be able to tie into in the organization, because being able to continue to realize existing investments in the organization is super critical, because nobody wants to rip and replace out a product, right? Like the level of effort now with the skill shortage out there and just already hard enough trying to find good talent, being able to leverage what you currently have and tie in and build stuff in our platform. And then over time, you can determine, what do I want to continue to bring over? What do I also want to build greenfield from scratch? And there's so many different use cases that organizations are looking at. Hey, I want to now do something more cloud native. I want to start this from scratch, and being able to do that, but being able to support the existing systems is super critical for any enterprise or government customer, because they have to support both the legacy and the bleeding edge technology out there, which some of it's not as bleeding edge anymore, but more of the cloud native stuff. and having something that can work within the constraints of both those requirements.
Right. When we look at this from a third-party perspective, one of the interesting things I think I looked at this was I'm able to create essentially a security plan. So if I'm outsourcing part of my development using your platform, I can actually create a security plan for that company to follow, meaning implementing tools and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because so many of us outsource, development. It's not even funny. I think every company in the world outsources some part of their development. How do you give security a little bit more control, and how do you help solve that communication barrier between what they're doing and adding that security aspect to it?
That's a great question. So one of the key things that we did from day one was focus on security system integrators, or just generally integrators that are doing that development work and building that, working within projects that you have. And then also the cybersecurity vendors, because the key is you want those building blocks to be able to have the baseline to start with what you're building from the vendors, right? So any vendor that you're working with, you want to be able to say, hey, now here's the modern approach to how I can automate. The other piece of it is the SIs. The SIs are providing that, the trusted advisors that are building stuff for you. And a lot of times it's, hey, here's a project, I built it for you, hand it off, and move on to the next one. Creating repeatability where hey, I was able to get a project that other organizations also were able to benefit from a standpoint of the baseline, and then I can have it customized to what my actual core requirements are, helps to ensure that not only that you can increase the velocity to get the end result or the outcomes quicker, but you also have the ability to come back into it in a more agile approach. So if I want to continue to pick back up on that project, I can, and have that capability. And so it's the agile piece of the ability to add or subtract into your pipelining process that's critical, because you may want to add in different or more cybersecurity tools into your pipeline. You might want to subtract some. You might want to add other pieces, building blocks into there. And so having that capabilities and functionality is super critical. But it starts at the companies that are providing the expertise for both from a product standpoint and from a services standpoint, and then being able to iterate on that over time.
Brilliant. We're almost out of time, but I'm not going to let you get away from us so easy. All right. So CISOs have a very difficult time selling anything to DevOps people. So I bring you in, Mike, and I say, everyone meet Mike Fraser. Mike Fraser is the guy who's going to help me help you. What's your sales pitch to the DevOps guys? Help me sell Refactr.
So when we first start out, we look at a use case and what is already being built internally. So you have a starting point that doesn't have to be built from scratch. So that could be a compliance assessment and remediation, where that's a major pain point and you immediately see the value of being able to get in there. But I would start, if it was on the DevOps team, saying, hey, these are the tools we support. You're not coming into just yet another point solution where you're just going to have to learn this thing and not have the functionality you're looking for. You can start from day one with all of the tools and the content you've created, and you can package that up and have it in a consumable format to your cybersecurity counterparts. And I also go on in the inverse of that, selling to the CISO and the cybersecurity team, where I have the inverse approach, where it's, hey, look, you can work with your cybersecurity team, but you have folks on your team that are already building scripts, Ansible playbooks, other things. Why don't we take those in, build pipelines around those, prove that out for your team, so now you have the confidence you can actually start building these pipelines, and then you can work with the DevOps team and say, hey, look, here's where we can tie this into your existing processes. So it's a win-win on both sides. And it's interesting you brought that up, because we right now have about a 50-50 sell into either on the CTO, CIO side to the DevOps team, or to the CISO and the cybersecurity team. And it just really depends on where the closest pain point is and how quickly they want to start using it. But as soon as the reciprocal team gets wind that we're in, they want in to use the platform too.
That's awesome. Mike, we're almost out of time. How can people touch base with you? What's the easiest way to get a hold of Mike Fraser?
Yep. So you can look me up on LinkedIn. Just look up IT as Code. I'm also on Twitter at IT as Code, or you can email me, Mike at Refactr, no O at the end of refactor.it.
Awesome. Brilliant. Folks, Mike Fraser, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really do appreciate it. Mike.
Thanks for having me, James.
Folk, lots more content coming up for RSA Gang. We've got so much stuff coming, I don't even know where to begin. So go check out Refactr. Thank them for supporting the show as well. And check it out. It's really cool because it helps us CISOs really solve some of our challenges when it comes to DevSecOps. So definitely give it a shout out and check it out. That's it for us here for this one episode. We have a lot more content coming on later today and tomorrow. Until then, folks, thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be right back shortly. Take care. Cheers, folks.
Make sure to subscribe to our podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. And get all the latest information at cyberhubpodcast.com.